Before I go too far afield, I would first like to discuss what is psych survival. It's a new concept, I realize, and I probably invented it myself, but there is a real basis for this. If we compare with a survivalist, we have to recognize that a survivalist is someone who's more concerned about preserving their physical body without much regard for their mental state. And perhaps this is because they believe that how they think and feel about things is so stable that it can't be disturbed even under threat, under physical threat of harm to them, because they have their guns with them. Perhaps what they believe about themselves is true, although it's easy to imagine that someone who thinks that they are so solid in their own person that they can't be upended under severe threat, even if they have a gun. I would say under these conditions, they have no idea of how they would respond unless they have experience being shot at or even having a weapon pointed at them. But that discussion is for a whole other day. For a psych survivalist, however, the important thing is not just to protect the body, but also to protect one's sense of self, their thoughts and actions, and their sense of overall well-being. This is the kind of stuff that a weapon can't protect, no matter how high-powered it is. The hope is that if you understand enough about yourself and how you react in situations of threat, and I'm not necessarily describing threat at gunpoint or the point of any other weapon, that the person that comes out the other side of that kind of an incident continues to feel at home with themselves and can essentially recover emotionally and mentally. That is what I consider psych survivalism. This is more of a mental process that allows the person to deal with stress without losing a sense of their identity. So on the other side of the stress, they can feel that they continue to be who they were before the stress occurred. The goal for individuals that I'm working with, that is the goal for me and the goal for them, is that when they come out, they can say that they continue to be who they are and that they feel comfortable in their own skin. This involves an integration of what amounts to a lifetime of experience, what we've been through over the course of a lifetime that makes us who we are. In other words, psych survivalism is a composite of everything that we've learned over the course of our lifetime and how we react to it, both stressful and non-stressful, what gives us pleasure and what doesn't. This is what makes us who we are as people. This is what makes us who we are as individuals. And as I personally believe, both as a person, a psychologist, and a therapist, one of the most important things that we can get out of being alive is to learn who we are. It's not the mere insistence that we know ourselves, but that we can look at ourselves and our experience honestly in order to assess what creates our character and who we are as individuals. This is not the kind of learning that can occur at the point of a gun. But more than that, what I intend to get into is a discussion of the training in psychology as it affects people who use therapy for their own self-improvement and development, and also who are simply trying to solve problems. We're talking about integrating experiences of a lifetime, the thing that makes each one of us different and who we are as individuals. In order to be able to do this, we need to be open-minded to ourselves and also to input from others without necessarily feeling defensive, although defensiveness can also be helpful in certain circumstances. And I will add that an even more important piece is that people be able to learn vicariously, That is, to learn by observing other people's experience, to see how they are affected by it, both physically and mentally, and whether or not we can learn anything from their experience that can help us to better adapt to our environment and to other people. Based on all this available evidence of ourselves and also of others, it's hard to evaluate all of the available evidence and put it into a coherent set of thoughts that allows us to adapt to different situations more effectively, although that should be part of any treatment. So what you will find me doing here is that I will be describing situations that I have had working in the field in various areas, of which I have had many experiences in very many areas, and I will present examples, not to go into any detail of specific cases, but to see how it reflects on other people's experience and how it reflected on mine when I went through it. That should include not only my training at the university, but also my clinical training before I got out in the field, and then had to see how my knowledge, how what I acquired during my schooling interacted with the professional world, which presented me with a whole different set of challenges and experiences, that some of which were designed to undermine what I knew about my profession and what I had experienced and learned in life. People are not that open-minded once you get out in the world, and especially if they have any position to challenge you. Positions of authority and power that give them the freedom to tell you what is true and what is false and what is right and what is wrong. This is a kind of psych survival stress that I am talking about. Those situations where you can say, I know that I had this experience and I know what it means and I have my value judgments, but you're going to tell me that I'm wrong. When you get into the courtroom and you're dealing with attorneys, you deal with that. And as we can see nowadays, you'll see the very same thing among politicians. Especially now, I am thinking about the case of Renee Good, who was shot to death in her own car, and the fact that the politicians that put her in the positions to be shot near her own home were saying, in fact, that the ICE agents were protecting themselves when anyone who saw any of the videos, including the video that was taken by the shooter while he was pulling the trigger, that it was a completely unnecessary shooting, that Renee Good was not putting his life in any jeopardy, and even the claim afterward that he suffered some sort of abdominal injury from the front bumper of her vehicle was completely false. We're talking about judgments made in the public arena by people who are willing to believe what they are told, but also what people think in the courtroom, the people on the jury, the defense and the prosecution, by the time this thing comes into the courtroom. And yet all of these things are psychological, and they all are associated with survival. But going back to my experience and my history working, and on a less loaded topic, I'd like to mention some of my experiences during the time that I worked at Social Security evaluating mental health disability claims. What I was frequently asked, and what you might ask, is how often people submitted claims based on lies, when they entirely fabricated symptoms, and maybe not entirely, but fabricated some symptoms with the hope that they would be allowed to receive disability payments. How often were these people faking? That's what I was asked most of the time, and probably would be asked now if I were continuing to work in that field. And my answer was this, and by the way, my answer continues to be this, that probably the number of fakers who applied for disability was extremely small, probably less than 1%. The reason that I gave, and what continues to be true, is that a lot of the people who applied believed that they suffered from some kind of mental illness, but they would start out with a zero knowledge of mental illness at all, but were worried because they had symptoms of depression that were affecting them, and that they might have gone to someone who actually diagnosed them with some kind of depressive disorder. The issue was that the people who were applying for the disability based on the diagnosis didn't know what the criteria were to determine whether they were eligible for disability, but also that they really didn't know what kind of severity their symptoms might be to make them believe that they were severely mentally ill. Basically, they didn't know the difference between a severe mental illness and one that is less severe and that doesn't qualify for assistance. To me, that's not faking at all. And I don't blame anyone for lacking that kind of knowledge. It's not commonly known, and I assume that anyone who is listening to this probably doesn't know either. In other words, their claims are valid, but it won't necessarily result in an allowance of benefits. To me, that's all fair, and I never held that against any claimant. Any claim that was filed that was denied simply because the symptoms were not severe enough. In fact, that was common. As I say, I saw very few fakers, and if I opened a case, I didn't assume that they were faking. Although there were other claims, and as I said, very few of them, where the claimant was actually faking the entire thing, and the symptoms that they reported and that were documented by mental health treatment providers just simply didn't meet the criteria. But more than that, they were not consistent. That was generally how you could identify fakers and separate them from non-fakers. But pardon me, it takes a certain kind of eye to separate those. You have to understand what you're looking at to say that doesn't make any sense at all. They're claiming one thing, and the set of symptoms is so extreme that it doesn't hold up to the kind of diagnoses that are being claimed. It even happened, although as I say very rarely, that they went to treatment providers who probably assured them, don't you worry, we'll help you get your disability, and they provide a record that would be, they think would be consistent with an allowance. But in fact, it is not consistent enough to make sense in terms of the diagnosis. That is, even if they have a PhD or a master's degree or anyone who is providing mental health treatment to someone who is really trying to get a government check. While it may not seem at all that this has any comparison to the murder of Renee Good and how that information was processed by the public and the news media, and also by the political pundits on the various TV stations. The similarity is that the information that is being reported is either consistent with what we have all observed on so many different videos that appeared in the media, but that also people who had a motive, people in the government, tried to make us believe that it occurred for a totally different set of reasons, to the point of saying that the shooter was the victim and that Renee Good, in fact, was not the victim at all but the perpetrator because she tried to run him over. I say, look at the video and see what makes sense to you. Now, the commonality is that if I was reviewing a record for Social Security to make a determination, I had to separate truth from falsehood, or even inaccurate reporting based on all of the other evidence available. The trick is to be able to recognize some consistency. That is, not only some consistency with what's occurring on the video, but consistency with our perception of what we're viewing when we see it. In fact, that's not much different to reviewing a mental health record to determine whether or not someone has a mental illness. It is essentially the same thing. The only difference is that I have the background and training to be able to assess that kind of information and separate truth from falsehood, or say truth from inaccurate statement, in order to arrive at a conclusion as to whether a claim is actually eligible for government benefits. It all comes down to truth from falsehood, and we often experience that, and I say we as one of the public, of the people listening to this recording, of what occurs in our personal lives when we find that our personal experience is distorted by the report of others and how they perceive us and who they consider us to be, without any knowledge of all those forces that influence us, including the stressors in our environment and the stressors in our history, and also including the very stress that is created by having them misinterpret who we are as human beings. Our ability to sort through all of this information from all of these different sources that surround us contributes heavily to our psychological survival. And so that is the basis for the kind of analysis that I will be doing here. I want to talk about clinical experiences, about common experiences, about what happens to each one of us as individuals. It's not like because I have a doctorate in psychology that I've sacrificed my humanity and I am not buffeted around by the way people treat me in the environment the same way that you do. As I say, we're all people and we all swim around in the same soup. The only difference is that I have more training and I have a lot of personal experience because of traumas from an early life that brought me to the point where I ended up in this field and practice in the way I do. But that doesn't make me different from anyone else. And all it does is give me the tools necessary to evaluate what's happening to the people that come to me, and also where it comes from, what the background of it is. Most of my interviews have been very exploratory, and also when I'm presented with a binder that has numerous records in it, hundreds of pages, I know how to sift through it in order to take out the important information to make a clinical analysis. But let's look at it. You have people from ICE going to Minnesota with the only instructions to arrest people. Just a few hours ago, I was watching a Substack video by a veteran, an older veteran with a long, bushy beard, who was confronting ICE agents. And he asked them whether or not any of them were veterans, whether any of them had served in the military. And then he went on to ask whether any of them had ever served with the police, even though they had their uniform said police all over them. Not a single one answered. As he continued to confront them, they didn't say a word. Not one of them could say that they had any police training or any military training, or even say that they fought in any war. So in essence, what we have are a group of people whose only instructions are to take people into custody because they are given a quota that they have to fill. It doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what your race is, it doesn't matter where you came from, but they see a warm body that they can make into a cold body even by shooting it or by taking it into custody and locking it up. There was no indication that they had any training at all, although they had very large weapons, and I am sure that they were automatics and would repeat their firing. In other words, they were just very large men in uniform and with weapons, whose charge was to take as many people into custody as possible, really no matter the race, although it is preferred that the race be brown, no matter what sex. And also, from everything that we see on the news, it didn't matter how old they were. There were kids, some less than a year old, who were subjected to flashbangs and tear gas And in one case, 6 of them had to be brought to the hospital because of that exposure. So what can we learn from this as budding psych survivalists? That if you're big and brawny and are given a weapon and a uniform, or even if you're big and fat and look that way, you cover your face and go out and show people who's boss and make up for all the frustrations you may have had in your past life. You can not only take it out on others, but you can also accept a substantial paycheck to reward you for your efforts. It's probably more money than any of them have made in their lives, and perhaps they even had no education to allow them to assess what it was they were accepting when they took on the task. But perhaps it gave them a very strong sense of satisfaction, knowing that they could make other people submit to their will. But there are still other lessons that we can take from this experience of witnessing people being abused by others who are masked and in uniform with large weapons who go around trying to intimidate people. That is, if you stand up to them and you stay within the rules when you're interacting with them, you can get them to back off. And I'm sure somewhere in the back of their minds, there is the recognition that if you kill somebody, or if you shoot somebody in the head the way Renee Good was killed, there is always the possibility that when things change, when the culture changes, when the morality changes, it's very possible they will be brought into court. The shooter will be brought into court, that is Jonathan Ross, and that he will be charged with murder, which is exactly what happened. And these ICE agents are so often compared with the Nazis from the 30s and 40s, although there is a significant difference. That is, that the Nazis were organized in their persecution and were probably better educated than the ICE agents that are recruited now. The only qualification for an ICE agent seems to be that they're able to carry a weapon and don't mind doing the tasks that are assigned because the reward seems so great in the form of a paycheck. What makes both of these the same is the morality. It's important to keep morality in mind when these things are being discussed, because whether you are in a therapeutic situation, receiving counseling or psychotherapy, or you're in a situation where you're marching around in a uniform that says police, even though you have no police training, morality is being exercised. It is hoped that people who provide therapy are aware that they have some moral base and how they are approaching their task. But unfortunately, the people who carry those guns don't even think about morality except the morality of collecting their paycheck. Otherwise, they wouldn't do what they're doing at all, but they would find it offensive to our community, to our culture, and to our country. It is morality that is the very thing that makes therapy what it is. Whoever is providing the treatment has to have a moral base that tells them that they should be helping other people, whereas people who are carrying weapons and wearing a uniform that says police and are approaching other people and bullying them and gassing them with flashbangs in order to intimidate. Their morality is to collect their paycheck and to go home. Perhaps they get some sense of satisfaction out of it, although I have yet to see what that might be. And what morality does it take to fly over the Gulf of Mexico by the coast of Venezuela in order to bomb people in boats that couldn't possibly be carrying drugs? But you're given the order and you follow orders. That is still another reason our former friends and allies no longer trust us. There is a moral base to all of this, and this is one of the primary foundations of what I have been calling psych survival. I had cause to laugh today when I saw that the Dow Jones Industrial Average had gone up because of a commitment supposedly made by the Ayatollah of Iran. He told our President Trump that he would stop killing protesters, and he was killing them by the thousands up until that commitment. The thing that I find diabolically funny is that Trump, or even the markets who have more of an interest in making money, would accept that kind of a declaration that he would no longer kill people under his regime, especially in the thousands. How many commitments did Trump make that he violated? This is a moral base. It's no different than the moral base of the ICE agents. It's no different from the moral base of Hitler's Gestapo. It is no different from the moral base that we bring into therapy when we do it. The only difference is our intentions. We are hoping to do good if we're trying to help people. But also, the people who don't have that commitment to helping others, in fact, to hurting them, are not looking at why they're doing it, except they are only seeking out their own personal rewards that often are to the detriment of others. So the Ayatollah tells Trump, I won't kill any more of my protesters. Don't you worry about it. Well, I'm sure that Trump would do the same thing even as ICE is killing people over here. There's no intention to follow through on commitments, and that's also part of the moral base, and it's also part of psychological survival. If we can't trust each other, what hope do we have for our culture and for ourselves? It is my intention to address these issues as well. If I am going to be discussing clinical issues, I will talk about those factors that influence those issues and how we can think about it, which is to say, how you can think about it rather than simply go into an evaluation or into treatment and expect that you will be helped if there is no commitment to good. Just in the same way that if you go out on the street in Minneapolis, that you can anticipate that your friends and neighbors will be there to help you out if you are confronted in a dangerous situation where the rules are not even specifically stated, but that you are seen as a target so that the person who is targeting you can collect a paycheck. Do you value commitment to others and to yourself? That you will help other people out in similar situations? When you go to a therapist, do you expect that as well? And especially when there is no obvious reward except for knowing that your home and your environment and your family are all in a stable situation that can be managed with the help of others. But to the contrary, if you're an ICE agent, what can you expect from support? If the administration changes, if the government changes and prosecutes you for murder or assault and battery, if you're one of those agents, will there be anyone there to defend you? Certainly no one from the neighborhood that was victimized through your efforts. So we have to start out with some kind of a moral base if we're supposed to survive. It's the same kind of moral base that if you're an Iranian protesting out on the street, that you can hope that your friends will be there to help you. These distinctions are primary if we are to preserve our place in the world and to survive. And these are all actually mental exercises, which are primary before anyone picks up a weapon or points a weapon at anyone. What are our intentions? What are the causes? What do we hope to get out of it? And that is with or without a weapon. And what are we to expect when we go home and others are judging our behavior while we are out in the community? This all goes to the processes that allow us to live in our own skin and to survive and to learn. I remember being told during the course of an evaluation that I was making for disability, back when I was doing interviews as part of an assessment. The claimant in this case was from a different race. He was brown-skinned. He had a fairly heavy accent to be able to identify him. And in the middle of the interview, he suddenly looks at me almost in surprise and says, "You're a doctor? Are you really a doctor? You're just a person." It was almost a surprise to him that someone who has a degree could talk to him directly as if to another human being. It was one of the biggest compliments that I had in my life, and especially as a professional, although I had one or two others that had similar impact. I am a person, and I never intend to be anything else. And I would suggest that if any ICE agent, if any Gestapo member ever thought of themselves otherwise, that's what made them into someone whose morality was distorted and bent and allowed them to do things that were criminal. These are the kinds of issues that I will be addressing here. These are issues that each one of us faces every day in one way or another. The only difference is that I will be subjecting it to a kind of analysis that probably most of you are not used to. It's not because I am picking your or anyone else's brain. I do not intend to do any clinical work with anyone who approaches me as a result of this podcast. Rather, I am trying to set a level playing field in which everyone can feel at home that we're following the same rules, no matter what's happening out in the world. My next discussion will be of the Reiner case, in which Nick Reiner murdered both of his parents. And at the core of this discussion, I will be thinking and will probably present the whole notion of whether or not people are actually good, if their natures are good, and if we can anticipate nothing but goodness from them. With the question, if not, why not? If so, then why? These are things that I think we can all think about and hopefully all discuss. So I look forward to any feedback and look forward to being able to present the next discussion. Until then, be well and do well, but especially be sane.